Hey guys, what is up? So originally this video was actually going to be my farewell from Dark Souls 3 video. I hadn't been playing much, I haven't had any chances to make videos, and I thought, well, it was about time to hang up the spurs, but I've actually started having some fun with the game again, so I don't think retirement's here quite yet. I don't expect I'll be making a lot of videos anymore, but I'll still make some occasionally, and I thought a good video to make would be kind of like a capstone on the Git Good series. I know I had a video previously on some tips on how to improve, and I've been thinking a lot about sort of trying to coalesce all the ideas I had about improving into a single video, trying not to duplicate anything that I've done previously, but try to give people generally good strategies for improving. So here we go. So my first tip is around watching other players, and I don't just mean watching them, I mean actually studying them. A great case in point, G9 is a great example. He streams frequently, he makes a lot of YouTube videos, and one thing that he does that I think is super helpful is he talks a lot about what he does when it works, when it doesn't, whether it was a good play, because sometimes even when you make the right play, things don't turn out the way you'd have liked. And sometimes you make a bad play and you get lucky and things turn out well for you anyway. And one of the things I like to do is I like to watch and imagine I'm in his shoes and what would I be doing, and then look at what he does differently and then try to draw lessons from that and let it help my own gameplay. And it certainly has. In fact, one of the big things that I've learned from him is the virtue of patience. He plays very patiently. I am traditionally an impatient player, and especially against the more difficult ganks, that frequently gets me in trouble. So watch really good players, learn what they do, study their behavior, watch how it deviates from what you do, and see what of that you can incorporate into your own gameplay. Next up is figuring out how to improve, and this requires a sober assessment of your own skills and looking to see what you can do better and figuring out whether you want to be better, because of course the better you get, the more time investment is required because of diminishing returns to get a little bit better. We all have other things we're doing with our lives, and not all of us want to play 14 hours a day to get better, so you have to decide how good do you really want to be, keeping in mind the trade-offs that are involved. And I'll share a quick lesson that I learned in my career early on. I had started off in a new role, it was unfamiliar to me, and I'd asked my boss to give me feedback at the end of the first 2 weeks on how I was doing. And realistically, I wasn't actually looking for feedback. I was looking for him to put me on his shoulders and tell me how awesome I was. And I remember he sat down and he had a list of 25 points of improvement. This was on a Friday, and I was super irritated with him. I thought, how dare he come to me with all this criticism? But over the weekend, I chilled out and I thought more about it, and I realized he probably had some legitimate points. And if I took it that way and I looked to improve, I would actually get better, and then I would have a path of sort of continued improvement. And I approach video games in the same way. I try to be really try to critique what I do and look and see if I want to improve, how could I actually go about doing that? Where am I weakest? Like if I compare myself to these really great players, what do they do that I do the worst? Now they do everything better, virtually everything. Their spacing's better, their timing's better. But my spacing's actually pretty good. So even if I worked thousands of hours on spacing, it's not going to get that much better. However, there are plenty of things I could work on. Weapon hard swapping is a big one, or ring hard swapping. These are things I don't do very well. I don't do them very often. And so even just a little bit of effort in these areas will have huge returns for me. And you just need to do for yourself the same thing. Figure out where you get the big returns and focus on those areas. So speaking of hard swapping, QY said something to me the other day. She said that 2020 invasions are one in the menu. And while I think that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, and I expect that she probably does too, there's also a lot of truth in that. The way the game's played has changed a lot. Hard swapping has obviously become a critical component of the way a lot of people play, and that can be weapon swapping or swapping away from a weapon to do a parry, or it could be various kinds of weapon swapping. So switching to something that has sudden poise or gives you a guard break, or goes from a slow weapon to a fast weapon, or something that does an Estus punish. And you can pick your weapons very situationally, and the more often you do that, the better a matchup you're going to create for yourself. And I know even from the limited amounts I've done, I've seen a return in my gameplay, and this is an area where I feel like actually I'm probably being left behind a bit. I don't have the time to dedicate to the game that I once did, so my hard swapping skills are definitely lagging the field. And that's one of the big reasons that what little time I do spend trying to improve as a player, this is the area I tend to focus on. Next up is around proper Estus administration, and by this I mean just maintaining your health at an efficient level. And I remember I've been playing the game since launch. I think it was around like 2017 where the invasion community as a whole realized, hey, more often than not when you die, you'll die with Estus left. So it's far better to accidentally quote unquote waste some Estus than to refrain from healing when maybe you should and then end up dying to the blunder. So maybe you've lost 400 hit points, you know an Estus heals for 600, so maybe you're reluctant to drink that Estus for fear that you're wasting the other 200, but don't worry about that. In those situations, you absolutely should Estus. Keeping your health close to full removes one of the main ways that invaders die. That is due to the blunder, so make sure that you top off. Now obviously if you use Siegs, then that's a great way to stay topped off, and for me I usually don't use them, but you know, if you're invading at meta level, almost everyone's using them these days. I really think you probably should go ahead and do the same again at meta. I think if you're fighting outside meta, not as many people keep them. I still keep them on my builds, but I'll only use them if I see that my opponents are using them, but generally I won't. But regardless of how you do it, via Siegs, via Estus, or Blessings, always try to keep your health topped off. And when I watch really great players like G9 or Pep, I notice they are really habitual about keeping their health topped off. And in fact, sometimes they'll avoid going for a kill shot on somebody just because their health is diminished by 400 or 500 HP. And that's a good lesson for me because those are the situations where I tend to go getting killed because I charge in to try to finish somebody off. So keep your HP up. Next up is around avoiding the blunder. One of the most frequent questions I get from players, they say, hey, what should I do when I'm in a situation and I'm being chased down by 3 players and 2 of them have spears and 1 of them has a dagger? What do you do in that situation to get away? And the answer is pretty much you just die. There isn't a lot that you can do in those situations. Yeah, you can keep a dagger around for a quick step. If you fast roll or swap armor to a fast roll build, you can kind of roll away and spam roll or use the blood ring. And there's a number of different options that you have, and you should certainly play around with those. But by and large, if you're in a chase down where you're getting chased down by 3 players, you've already screwed up. You should never allow yourself to be put in that situation when you can prevent it. Can't always, but you should always play conservatively. The stronger the gank squad you're against, the more conservatively you need to play. Play with patience. Don't allow yourself to be put in a position where maybe you see a 3v1 and you decide to fight for a bit and then you realize they're too good, you can't face them head on just by yourself, and then you try to get away. Halfway competent gankers are all going to have good chase down weapons because this is what they spend the majority of their time doing, is chasing down invaders in these 3v1s, so don't let them put you in that situation. Gankers today, they're too good. In fact, I almost made a video like 2 years ago about how gankers could improve a lot, and I decided not to do it because I didn't want to give them any help. But one of the deficiencies I saw in a lot of gank squads was they were not efficient at roll catching. Like, they wouldn't stagger their swings very often, when if they did, they would cut off any option you had. Somebody swings on wake, somebody swings for a roll catch, and you're in the blender and there's nothing you can do. Well, nowadays, a lot of the gank squads do this, so you just can't let yourself be put in that position because you can literally have no option. So just avoid the blunder whenever possible. Next up is one I used to harp on a lot years ago, and I don't think I've brought this up in quite a while, so I'll bring it up again for some of my newer viewers. Record your own invasions. I cannot emphasize how much this helps. You will be absolutely shocked, I guarantee it. Record your invasions. Record a few invasions and then think about before you watch and what you think you did, and then watch and see what you actually did. And I guarantee you will be shocked to see the openings that you missed, the amount of times you panic rolled when you thought you didn't. There's an awful lot to be learned from watching your own gameplay. I learned this on accident when I started recording gameplay for my YouTube channel and then started watching it back for purposes of commentary, and was surprised to see just how often I panic rolled, for instance. So don't make that mistake. Make sure that you watch some of your own invasions from time to time, and not just the highlights. I know those are the most fun to watch, but you actually learn the most from watching where you did poorly. Make sure you watch those every now and then, and you'll be really surprised to see what you learn. Next up is finding the right mix of rolling. And usually players kind of go through an evolution where they start out playing and they they either panic roll or they anticipatory roll. And anticipatory rolling actually works against players that aren't that great, because when you think they're going to swing is when they're going to swing. But against better players, they will pick up on what you're doing and then they will start roll catching you every time you panic roll. However, it is, in my view, impossible to always reaction roll. And what I mean is, even if you have the discipline down, even if you know exactly what the correct roll timings are, even if you are the best at reaction rolling, and even if you could perfectly reaction roll even a dagger, it's impossible to do all the time because the camera field of view simply isn't big enough. There's always going to be times where the camera is not pointed in the direction you need, and you're going to have to make your best guess about when to roll. That doesn't mean just spamming roll, but that means rolling on prediction. You're gonna have to do prediction-based rolling, but you should always be doing that thoughtfully. You shouldn't be doing it just because you want to spam the roll button to get away. But when your camera's not in a good position, you will have to sometimes anticipatory roll or prediction roll, but that should generally be the exception. You shouldn't be doing that often, but especially in situations where you're surrounded or you roll past another player and you have to quickly snap the camera back, you won't always be able to do that. But don't use that as an excuse to get lazy about your rolling, and you should always endeavor to reaction roll whenever you can. But even the best players can't always reaction roll, and so you have to be okay with that and kind of find the right mix that works for you. Okay, and for my last set of tips, these are going to be smaller ones, so I'm not going to spend as much time on each one. We'll kind of call this the kitchen sink. I'm going to throw in a bunch of things here. First, play with a lot of setups, especially for newer players. Make sure you try out a wide variety of weapons, learn what works for you, and learn what works situationally. As an invader, you have to be a jack of all trades, and you need to have mastery, or at least a good deal of expertise with all the weapons, because at a minimum, it's going to teach you how to deal with other people who are using those setups. But on an even better plus side, it's going to prepare you for situationally using these weapons, because lots of weapons have a role in an invader loadout. You just have to know when to swap to these weapons and use them. So make sure that you give a lot of different weapons a try. This was a problem I had early in my Souls career where I never used other weapons. Don't make the mistakes that I did. Make sure you try a lot of different ones. Make sure you learn things like fishing. Even if you don't like fishing that much, it teaches you how to counter people who are trying to fish you. And it's always great to have that in your back pocket, even if you want to play primarily rustically, which I recommend if what you're trying to do is win invasions. You want to play primarily rustic play with a little sprinkling of crit fishing thrown in. But in order to do that, you've got to really practice it. So you have to kind of give yourself over to crit fishing for a bit, get killed a bunch, and then as you learn, you'll be able to bring those things out. And if people are used to you just fighting rustically, you can surprise people with a little bit of well-timed fishing. Also, be able to assess other players' skills. I think I've mentioned this before, but I think this is one of the great untold skills that you need to have as an invader. You have to very quickly be able to assess another player's skill level and understand what they're going to do in various situations. So if you just roll caught somebody with a parry tool, do you go for another roll catch? Are they likely to try to parry the roll catch they expect to see coming? And one thing I've learned from aggressive roll catching, even when people have parry tools, is that you can pretty predictably slot people's behavior into these groups and know whether you're really at risk as somebody trying to parry an incoming roll catch attempt. This also kind of relates to this next point, which is I really advise people drop the parry tools. And when I say drop the parry tools, what I mean is don't give your offhand over to a full-time parry tool. It's 2020. The vast majority of players aren't going to fall for simple parry baits anymore. The opportunity cost of that parry tool is very high. You're giving up the opportunity to either two-hand your weapon or have a better offhand weapon in place. And then worst of all, when you have a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And I know from my experience, when I have a parry tool out, I go for way too many parries and I end up getting punished a lot. And that was one of the reasons I got rid of it long ago. And what happens is when you get rid of the parry tool, you stop looking for parry opportunities and you start thinking more about your spacing, your positioning, getting reads, and you will become a much better player. I'm not saying never go for parries. I'm not saying never have a parry tool out. I'm just saying if that's your default setup, if that's usually how you play with a parry tool, give it a try, give it up for at least a few days, even just a single session. commit to not using it, and I promise you will see a lot of things in your play. You'll become a much better player, and then after you've improved, if you want, bring it back out from time to time, or try hard swapping to a parry tool. That's always really effective, but just at least try giving it up for a bit of time. My last and final tip: play players who are better than you. Depending on how good you are, this may be easier or hard, but I will tell you that I learn more probably in a couple hours of fighting a top tier opponent than I would in weeks and weeks and weeks of invasions. The things that you learn there can definitely translate to the other fights. It won't just help you against top tier players. Top tier players will ruthlessly exploit every mistake you make, and they will show you where the weaknesses are in your game. Even if you're not good at seeing them yourself, I promise they will see them, and that will help you get a lot better. Now, if you're a newer player, you don't have to fight somebody that good to have your mistakes revealed to you. You just have to fight somebody that's better enough that they're gonna pretty much wipe the floor with you, but you will learn an awful lot from doing that. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed these tips. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks so much for coming by. Take care now.